Yo, YouTube, what's up with your boy? Sports and Fitness Rants. I'm back, guys. Click that like button. Subscribe to my channel. What's up, y'all? Welcome back, guys. Welcome back. Got another great video for you guys today. As usual, you guys know the deal, man. You know what it's about in this channel. We're here to tell the truth. We're here to put up the facts. We're here to educate, right? We're here to celebrate Michael Jordan and his era and stop the lies, right? They continue to tear these guys down to lift up the current players, and we won't stand for this any longer. And in this video, we're going to speak about Michael Jordan in the 1990s Eastern Conference because they're always trying to tear down Michael Jordan's era, right? He didn't play against anybody, right? They're taxi cab drivers, they're plumbers, they're slow white guys, all this stuff. So we're going to talk about Michael Jordan's 1990s Eastern Conference in this video briefly. And I want to thank you guys for all your love, man. Everybody worldwide, everybody across the states that's been showing me love, that's been supporting my channel through your views, through subscribing, your comments. It means a lot to me, guys. Thank you very much, man. And you guys know what to do, man. Turn the volume all the way up. Hit that play button. Remember, these videos are for educational purposes. And let's roll. So, yes, guys, many times when we hear them talk about Michael Jordan these days on the mainstream media, unfortunately, they like to tear down Michael Jordan and his era, right? They like to talk about these guys as not being skilled, not being that athletic, right? Just not being really good, right? And they'll pump these guys up in this era as being superior. And there's really no evidence or facts to support that notion, right? Everything, in fact, points to the 90s being a very competitive era with legends all over the league. We know who they are. But when we think about Michael Jordan in the 1990s, right, the Eastern Conference, and we always talk about Michael Jordan's road to the finals and the difficulty of that road, right? Oftentimes, one of their toughest tests would be in the Eastern Conference. They would be battle-tested going through these teams in the Eastern Conference. That's part of the reason why the Chicago Bulls were undefeated in the finals, right? We talked about the years leading up to the 90s, right? 88, 89, and in 90. Right? We talk about the learning experiences from guys like Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, John Paxson, B.J. Armstrong, right? Bill Cartwright, right? In that early Bulls teams, right? That hardened them, right? That prepared them going through those battles all those years against those really good teams, those great teams, right? The 80s Celtics, right? The 80s Pistons. These are all-time great teams. But going into the 90s, it remained the same competitiveness in the Eastern Conference. So when we think about the 1991 season, right? The first season the Bulls would break through. They had to play the Detroit Pistons again in the Eastern Conference Finals that year. The back-to-back champion Eastern Conference Finals again against the Pistons. This was what? The Pistons, fifth year in a row in the Eastern Conference Finals? Back-to-back champions. That's who the Bulls were facing that year. Now, there were other quality teams in the Eastern Conference that season, right? The Boston Celtics, who I believe won like 52 games or 55 games, whatever it was that season. They were very formidable. People think, well, Larry Bird was old and he wasn't really playing that well. Larry Bird was still playing. Yes, he was dealing with the injuries, but Larry Bird was a true warrior, a true competitor. But the Celtics still had Robert Parrish, Kevin McHale, and they had newer, younger talent now that was emerging. Guys like D. Brown, guys like Reggie Lewis, right? Shout out to Reggie Lewis. Rest in peace to Reggie Lewis. This guy probably would have been a Hall of Famer. One of the really good two-way shooting guards in those early 90s. But he would emerge as the leader of the Celtics. And I believe they were the number 2 seed that season, ahead of the Pistons. The Pistons beat that team in the playoffs and faced off against the Bulls in the Eastern Conference Finals. The Pistons were not old, right? They always tell you the Pistons were old in 91. We know they were not old. They were still a formidable team. The Bulls beat that team in the Eastern Conference. Also in that 1991 playoff run, they had to play against Charles Barkley's Charles Barkley's 76ers. Charles Barkley was a great player, right? Charles Barkley, man, in the early 90s, this guy was amazing. There was competition in the Eastern Conference. We think about the 1992 Eastern Conference Finals against the Cleveland Cavaliers, who were a very formidable team, very well-coached team, with guys like Mark Price, Brad Daugherty, Larry Nance, right? Hot Rod Williams, Craig Elo. These guys were on that team in 92. Gerald Wilkins. No, excuse me, Gerald Wilkins was not on the 92 team, guys. He was on the 93 team. But they were a very formidable team, right? Several guys scoring in double figures for that team. Guys like Mark Price is a borderline Hall of Famer. He had a couple of injuries, but he was a very, 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 very good point guard of that era. Doesn't get talked about, right? Because there were many great point guards when Mark Price played. Brad Daugherty should be in the Hall of Fame, but the injuries derailed his career. Very solid big man, right? Played with Michael Jordan in North Carolina. But the Cleveland Cavaliers were a very formidable team. Remember the Cleveland Cavaliers that the Bulls beat in 1989 on Michael Jordan's shot. People forget that in the late 80s into the early 90s, before the Bulls emerged, the Cleveland Cavaliers were being touted as the next team in the Eastern Conference. They were supposed to be the next team up after the Detroit Pistons. They were supposed to be the team in 89 to challenge the Pistons. But it was the Bulls because of Michael Jordan's greatness. Once again, I've always told you guys, the Bulls were not always the best team top to bottom, but they had Michael Jordan. That was the difference. And in 1992 Eastern Conference Finals, the Bulls were tested by teams like the Cleveland Cavaliers, right? By teams like the New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference semifinal that pushed them 7 games. A very physical New York Knicks team coached by Pat Riley, led by Patrick Ewing, guys like Charles Oakley, right? Guys like Joe Wilkins and guys like Xavier McDaniel. That was a very formidable team. One of the best offensive teams of that era, the early 90s Knicks. But people tell you that there was no competition in the Eastern Conference in the 90s. We think about teams like the Atlanta Hawks with Dominique Wilkins, Kevin Willis, Mookie Blaylock, Stacey Augmon. We think about Reggie Miller's Indiana Pacers with guys like Rick Smits and Vern Fleming. There were many, many good teams in the Eastern Conference. We go to 1993. The New York Knicks in the Eastern Conference Finals, one of the greatest teams to not win a championship of that era. The 90s Knicks, man, were tough. Once again, led by Patrick Ewing, Charles Oakley, John Starks would emerge. The New York Knicks were a very physical team. They were like the Detroit Pistons, except they were not dirty. They were more physical. The Pistons were known for being dirty, right? Trying to hurt you, trying to take you out. The Knicks just wanted to pummel you into submission. Guess who the Bulls were playing in the 90s? There were many, many tough teams. Like I mentioned, the Atlanta Hawks with Dominique Wilkins that the Bulls had to beat during that playoff run in 1993. We won't talk about 1994 and 1995. We know Michael Jordan was not there and he came back, and they lost to the Orlando Magic and blah, blah, blah. But let's think about 1996. That same Orlando Magic team now, 1 year later, they're in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Chicago Bulls. Right, I told you this was the reckoning season for Michael Jordan. Right, they were going to get some payback on the Orlando Magic and the entire NBA. That Orlando Magic team was formidable. You had Shaquille O'Neal, who's one of the all-time greats. You had Penny Hardaway. We all know about Penny Hardaway and the injuries that he would suffer through his career. But if he did not have those injuries, we all know Penny Hardaway would have been one of the all-time greats. This man was sensational. He was special. The Bulls had to beat that team. How many games they win? How many 60-win teams did the Bulls beat in the 90s? They beat a lot of 60-win teams, guys, in a 10-year stretch there, in a decade. I believe to this day, the Chicago Bulls and Michael Jordan defeated more 60-win teams in the 90s than any other team in a decade. We think about 1997. the Miami Heat in the Eastern Conference Finals. I told you guys, right? Michael Jordan took it personal against those guys. Personal, right? They elbowed Scottie Pippen. Alonzo Mourning elbowed Scottie Pippen, gave him that huge knot. Right? Michael Jordan calling the team together the next practice and telling them it's personal now. We're going to stand up for Scottie. Right? Scottie Pippen didn't play that many minutes in that next game. And the Bulls still beat him. The Miami Heat were a very tough team. They won 60-plus games, coached by Pat Riley again. That man, Pat Riley, was everywhere. Always had really good game plans against Michael Jordan and the Bulls. Right? They had a good team. Alonzo Mourning, Tim Hardaway, Dan Marley, Rashawn Leonard, Jamal Mashburn. These guys were tough, man. There were many tough teams in the NBA's Eastern Conference during the 90s. Many great players. Once again, the reason why the Bulls were tested in the Eastern Conference is the reason why they were undefeated, or one of the reasons they were undefeated in the finals. They were prepared, right? They always got tested. They didn't have a cakewalk to the finals. So when they got to the finals, right, they got pummeled by teams because they really weren't that great in the Eastern Conference. No. The Bulls were always ready, battling in the Eastern Conference, a very physical Eastern Conference. And we think about the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals against the Indiana Pacers, right? One of the best teams also in the 90s to not win. That 98 Pacers team, they were right there, man. But once again, Michael Jordan raising his level of play, right? Raising his teammates up to beat the Indiana Pacers in a 7th game. But we think about how tough and scrappy that team was. They were tested, the Pacers. Right? I did a Forgotten Team series on them. They were tested. They were in the Eastern Conference Finals like 4 or 5 times in the 90s. I want to say at least 4 times or 3 times in the 90s they were in the Eastern Conference Finals. Yeah, I want to say 4 times in 1999 also. And they went 7 games, 3 out of those 4 times. 7-game series, man. Reggie Miller with the heart of a champion, with the grit. Guys like Rick Smits, Derek McKee. They had Mark Jackson on that team, Chris Mullin on that team. The Davis boys. They were formidable, man. The Bulls needed everything to beat them. Which is why, once again, they were prepared for the NBA Finals. Michael Jordan's Eastern Conference, right, in the 90s, the Bulls had competition. Right, I told you guys, in 1991, right, they're playing the Detroit Pistons, the back-to-back champion Pistons. In 1992, they're playing the Cleveland Cavaliers in the Eastern Conference Finals. Right, one of the better defensive teams, one of the better rebounding teams, one of the better offenses, one of the better well-coached teams. A very well-balanced team from top to bottom. They were deep. I told you the Cleveland Cavaliers were supposed to be the next team up after the Pistons, but Michael Jordan and the Bulls had other ideas. We think about 1993 against the New York Knicks, right? The year before they pushed the 7 games, right? Then they had them down 2 games to nothing. They had home court advantage in Knicks. They won 60-plus games. They were the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, not the Bulls. They were a really good team, that New York Knicks team, man, in the early 90s. Pat Riley, the leadership of that man. We think about the 1996 series against Orlando Magic, right? Shaquille O'Neal, Penny Hardaway, Horace Grant, Nick Anderson, Dennis Scott. They were deep. Once again, top to bottom, they were deep. We think about the 1997 series against the Miami Heat. Once again, another deep team, another team coached by Pat Riley. Alonzo Mourning, Tim Hardaway, Jamal Mashburn, Dan Marley. These guys were tough, man. P.J. Brown. And then we think about the 1998 Eastern Conference Finals against the Indiana Pacers. Just talked about these guys. Once again, another deep team, well coached by Larry Bird. Reggie Miller, Chris Mullin, Mark Jackson, the Davis boys, Derek McKee. Right, they were deep, man. All those teams, every Eastern Conference final, guys, was a different team. Everyone was a different team. That shows the level of competition in the Eastern Conference in the 90s. Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls, only faced 2 sub-500 teams in the entire 90s playoff runs. Only 2 times. I told you, in the 90s, between the playoffs and the finals, they beat more 60-win teams in that decade than any other team in NBA's history. Michael Jordan and the Bulls were never pushed to a Game 7 in the NBA Finals, but in the Eastern Conference, they got pushed to a Game 7 when? In 1998 Eastern Conference Finals, they got pushed to a Game 7 in the 1992 semifinals. Right? They won 7 games in the 1990 Eastern Conference Finals against the Detroit Pistons. They were being pushed. I hate when I hear people talk about the 90s and they try to tear it down. The 90s had great talent all throughout the NBA. Every team had a star. Some had 2. Maybe 3. But these are all-time greats. You guys know the deal, man. Shout out to Michael Jordan, the Chicago Bulls of the 90s. There's a lot of good teams, man, a lot of great players in the 90s Eastern Conference, man. The Bulls didn't have a cakewalk, once again, which is why they were always prepared in the NBA Finals. Right? They didn't just coast through the Eastern Conference and then get to the finals and get beat down. No, they were always tested. They were always ready going into the finals. You guys know the deal, man. I'll catch you guys on the next one.